George Prendergast is both an academic scientist as well as someone from industry. The marriage of biotechnology and academics. He's a scientist, he's a provocateur, he's an innovator, he's got more than 30 patents. He's the president and the CEO of the Lacanau Institute for Medical Research in Philadelphia. Now, what George is about to tell you about is really not out from left field. This is actually becoming mainstream medicine. And this really is the future. And this is how we're going to both prevent some diseases and treat some other diseases. George?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's my job to sum up a little bit of what you've heard from a seat of a generalist. When I went to the Lacanau Institute 10 years ago, it was to do the biggest experiment of my life, was to combine inventiveness and new knowledge in new ways. And we've started 16 companies, and we've have a number of academic labs that do clinical medicine. We also have a population health group. And in that holistic kind of mosh pit we've created, there's an analogy to what I'll tell you about today, which is about the microbiome. The microbiome is the third layer of what you've heard today. You've heard the first layer of you, the genetics of you, the mutations, where tumor cells arise and what we do to combat them. You've heard about immunotherapy, the immune system that is the second wave that has the ability to control that in principle or tolerate it, being defeated by the immune system. I'd like to tell you about the third layer now, the other you, the microbiome. As Dr. Brawley has commented, this is the world of microbes that live in and on you. Cancer and the microbiome. The microbiome is something that scientists are only beginning to understand. We've known for many years that our bodies naturally are covered by and infused with many kinds of microorganisms. But it's only until really recently that we've understood that you are not an autonomous organism. You are filled with species. As we begin to look at those species by sequencing the DNA that we can collect from skin samples or stool samples or the lung or the mouth or the underarms, the feet, the hands, enormously diverse. What lives on you is an ecology. You are an ecology. And the complexity of that third layer is as complex as the cells that live in you. It's an amazing thing to think that we're even discovering new species this way, that we could never culture, we didn't even know were there. And not just bacteria, or mycoplasma, or microbacteria, or fungi, or algae, or yeasts, or parasites. There are many, many worlds within us that we're just now discovering through this ability of looking at the molecules that tag those organisms we didn't even know existed. So there's you, and there's other you. And other you is really diverse. Trillions of microbes. There are many other you cells as there are you cells in you. So you can imagine that when you begin to think about that complexity and everything that's in us, that world, which we have only just begun to discover, is going to affect you. And that's where the promise of where I'm going to lead you today, and tell you a little bit about microbiome and health. The microbiome is infused into us at the very moment of birth. When you're born, you pass through the birth canal, you are infused with a world of bacteria that represents your mother's experience and the experience of the environment into which you're born. And immediately, the first instinct of the baby is to put things in its mouth, initially mother's milk, where you get milk sugar. Why would mammals use milk sugar? Our bodies don't run on that. But babies seek milk sugar. Mammals evolved it. Milk sugar attracts lactobacillus, milk-loving bacteria. So right from birth, again, milk-loving bacteria are attracted in our evolution of our bodies. Milk-loving bacteria are very good for our gut, and if you take a probiotic, chances are it has a lactobacillus strain in it. So that world of microbiome is infused right from the beginning of your life. It covers you and infuses you. But it's also something that, as not you, is dynamic, and it evolves very quickly. In this last century, we have enormously evolved in other you due to hygiene, sanitation, antibiotics, vaccines. No one would go back to the old days when our other you was a heavy burden to carry. and we're simpler now in that we don't carry the same heavy burden quantitatively. But qualitatively, we may be very different, and we're not completely sure about this, but think of it for a moment. Our great-grandparents really didn't go anywhere, and they ate the same stuff, and their world was very simple. But today, we have international trade and travel. Everything you touch and you eat, every part of the world you go to, you're finding new species now that are going to infuse your oncology and change it. New materials. This century, 20 million new man-made chemicals and biochemicals in the world we live in. Diet, of course. Our diets are so diverse today. All this has changed the makeup of the microbiome. If you give up bread today, in 3 days, your gut bacteria will be completely different. What's going on with you day to day, literally day to day, affects other you, affects how you feel, how you act. It trains a healthy host. So when you're infused with that bacteria from the beginning of life, it's affecting your metabolism, your physiology, and your immunity. We now know that the immune system is trained by the influx of all those bacteria. So the baby's instinct to crawl around, put dirt in its mouth, do all that sort of thing, that is a process of training the body to where the body lives. Here's all the stuff around me. The food I eat, the things that I touch, the air that I breathe, it's all got microorganisms in it, and you're training the immune system to get used to your environment. So health, one of the things we've learned is health has to do with diversity of that community of bugs, if you like, that other you. The more diverse the other you is, that seems to go with good health. That's really the only thing we're sure about right now for microbiome in us. We know that if you're sick, you're more likely to have an other you that doesn't have quite as many species. If you're healthy, you're more diverse. You're a blooming flower, if you like, and not a wilting flower. One of the main areas of attention, and I'm sure a lot of you know about this, is the gut microbiome, the world of bacteria that live in our GI tract. Many of us take probiotics or prebiotics. And what the striking thing we're learning about the gut is like an immune brain. There's a lot of lymphocytes that live there. There's a lot of neurons, brain cells that live there. There's a huge amount of communication that's happening in the gut that is training the body and constantly in communication with it and regulating it. And the species that live in the gut and their metabolism and their physiology, their world, the other you world, it's very much affecting what your world is doing. So much so that if you take an animal, or even now people, and you move bacteria or you move samples between animals and people, you can change very much how they feel and work. It's really amazing. Now, some of this is a little bit hard to handle because literally what physicians do in many experiments, and we've done this in the laboratory, is move the gut bacteria from one person to another, a stool transplant or a fecal transplant. It's a little unseemly. But not only we're taking these samples and we're sequencing the DNA, we're moving them around, it makes the lab kind of a stinky place to be, literally. But what we've learned is that we can influence other you simply by moving one ecology from the other. So an ecology of a jungle, we can move to the ecology of the plains, or the ecology of the plains, we can move to the ecology of the wooded forests to the northeast. This kind of idea. What we have learned so far, though, as we do that is you might think, well, there are certain species that are good for us, and certain bugs, and I mentioned lactobacillus as being one of those. But that doesn't seem to be the case. The more we look at people, the more we find out everybody's different. We all have our own ecology. It's like the ecologies of the world. If you travel the world and you go to different countries, everything's a little bit different. There may be some common plants, but most things are a little bit different. The most shocking thing we found so far in the field of cancer research is your gut microbiome can determine whether or not you respond to immunotherapy. So that third layer of other you, the layer of the microbiome, can influence whether your immune system decides to tolerate your tumor or fight it. If you take a patient that's responding well and you take some of the gut microbiome and you put it into a patient that is not responding to an immunotherapy, you can turn them around and they begin to have a response. It's amazing. We would have never thought of this 5 years ago, even, that there would be the other you influence so powerful that would have determined what a cancer therapy would do. To me, this is still shocking. The amazement that comes from just treating the immune system, as you heard from Dr. Finn, that you could influence your immune system to change its attitude, not tolerate your tumor anymore, but fight it. And medicines that help do that don't help everyone. But if we go into patients that aren't being helped, the therapy may help as long as we put in the right ecology. So the vision of the future here really is we're going to learn a lot more about microbial physiology and metabolism. And the term I want you to remember is immunometabolism. You think of the metabolic concerns of your body, the metabolic concerns of you as being autonomous. They're not. That other you is constantly talking to you, and it acts so powerfully that it can change your body's attitude about the disease it may have. Now, as I mentioned, we really don't know a lot about microbiome yet. We're finding new species because we're sequencing the DNA and we're finding thousands and thousands of things we don't even know what they are yet, but we can see the molecules that are in those cells. So we don't understand a great deal yet, but we have found out about specific determinants of health. Diversity is typically good, no matter what your ecology is. More species is better. We know that it has a powerful effect on training immunity. And as Dr. Finn mentioned, these papers in Science that just came out, they put in place now the big idea for the field of cancer research, not just the tumor cells, not just what your immune system thinks, what the microbiome is doing and what it thinks, because it's training the immune system to determine how it feels about a tumor. And this really comes back full circle. In the history of cancer research, immunology was the original observation. At the Lankenau Institute, where I'm honored to be president, we were one of the first cancer centers in the country to be dedicated to cancer research. And our roots go back to what had been previous to World War I called the German Hospital Philadelphia, Lankenau being a German name. And so we knew Rudy Virchow, and we knew his original observations about tumors looking like inflamed, immunologically aberrant tissues. And we knew about Dr. Coley, who was giving infections, as Dr. Brawley mentioned, as a way to change the response of a body to clear metastatic cancer. Well, now we're in a position to say, well, that's the microbiome world. Actually, Dr. Coley and Dr. Virchow back in Germany, they already were thinking about that, but they didn't have the molecules, didn't have the cells, they didn't have a way to put it all together. But in some ways, we're back to the future. In closing about metabolism, I want to show you, as I brought one of these with me, here's a kind of immunotherapy. It came from the Lankenau Institute with our colleagues at Georgia, the NCI, and a company we started that was bought by New Link Genetics, now a public company. Immunotherapy in a pill. There's not too many immunotherapies in a pill. Most of them are infusional or given by an injection. And this particular immunotherapy, called an IDO inhibitor, this version, indoximab, this is a really interesting molecule, and we haven't been able to figure it out for years, and now recently we're thinking we understand it a little bit better. We think this drug is actually working through the microbiome. This drug is a very simple derivative of D-tryptophan. So if you remember some of your basic biology, you might remember that the amino acids of nature and the sugars of nature come in two-handed forms. Our bodies and plants, they make, and we use only one form, one-handed form. The other-handed form we don't use. Indoximab is actually the other-handed form of tryptophan, with a slight variation. Bacteria use this other-handed form. And now we think that the way these immunotherapies are working, the immunometabolic effect that they're having in the body on tryptophan, it's not mediated through the body's interest in tryptophan, the rarest and most precious amino acid, but it's the bacterial world, it's the microbiome world. And somehow we're adding a metabolic agent used by that world, which is changing its attitude to affect the immune system, and then the immune system can change its attitude about the tumor. What's so fascinating about indoximab is that we find that same drug will also mitigate autoimmune effects. So we're changing the attitude about the body not only for cancer, which is not enough immune reaction, if you like, but autoimmunity. Maybe too much immune response. So this new world of thinking about how we treat the microbiome might be sort of an Eastern idea of getting new balance. Putting the body's microbiome in a place where the immune system gets healthier, not only in ways to fight cancer, but to fight other diseases. And in closing, I want to leave you with two ideas about where this new realm of microbiome takes us. One is in thinking about using immunotherapies to correct the defects of the body. I mentioned about autoimmunity. These drugs can also clear not only cancer gunk, if you like, but in animals at least, Alzheimer's gunk, atherosclerotic gunk, diabetic gunk. That the immune system can be righted to get involved to correct disease states Not necessarily cure, but to make it subclinical so that you can live healthily. You can live a healthy lifespan, you can live a longer lifespan, and put these diseases at bay. And the second idea I want to leave you with is the regenerative capability of the body. Cancers and many diseases create a regenerative capability that's rogue. Cancer tissues take over the body. But the stem cells that are there might be reprogrammed. One of the most interesting features of the inflammatory immune world, being influenced by the microbiome, is that we might be able to take advantage of a disease such as cancer or autoimmune disease and take some of the capabilities that the body has acquired, in this case for rogue or ill purposes, and reprogram it and move it into a different zone. So that we can take, for example, maybe the stem cells, that tumor that you had was created, and now use those stem cells and reprogram them in a different direction. So in thinking about what the microbiome might be able to do, it's still early days full of very radical ideas like this, but it does present, and I want to leave you with, the promise of the third layer, the other you, the world of medicine as we're going to see it, not only how it influences our susceptibilities to cancer and our ability to respond to modern cancer treatments, but also to move into other zones of disease to find a long health span. Thanks for your attention.